The wind was restless that day, carrying with it the scent of dust and distant despair. Koru sat atop a jagged outcrop, his grey-furred form silhouetted against the orange sky. His eyes, worn and weathered, scanned the horizon with a kind of detached vigilance. The dry season had stripped the land of color and moisture. Cracked earth groaned beneath the weight of the sun, and the once vibrant acacia trees now stood like skeletons. Brittle and hollow, Koru was no longer the leader of his troop. That time had passed. He had stepped away. Some whispered, because of age, others, because of madness. He rarely spoke now, rarely fought, but he saw things. He listened when no one else did. And sometimes, he noticed what others ignored. The fire had come suddenly, wild, furious, and all-consuming. It raced across the plains with a roar like thunder, fueled by dry grasses and the careless spark of a storm. Animals fled in every direction. A chaotic exodus that left behind silence and ash. When the fire passed, only scorched land remained, smoking and stinking of death. For 2 days, Koru had stayed close to the edges of the burned zone, watching. Other baboons had moved on, avoiding the charred ground with instinctive fear. But Koru lingered. Something in the wind unsettled him, something beneath the ordinary pattern of fire and survival. On the third morning, he heard it, a sound, not wind, not bird, not the groan of a dying tree. It was a cry, thin, high-pitched, wavering, and it came from the heart of the blackened plain. Koru's head tilted. He remained still, listening. Again, the cry echoed, this time joined by a second, fainter one, then a third. Infant voices. Without hesitation, Koru descended from his perch and padded forward, his gait steady despite his age. The earth beneath his feet was still warm. Ash swirled with every step, and the air was heavy with the bitter taste of soot. He moved quietly, his ears twitching, drawn to the sound. He found them near the hollowed remains of a marula tree. 3 lion cubs. Their fur was matted with ash. Eyes half shut, bodies trembling. They were tiny, younger than Koru had expected, barely able to stand. One tried to hiss weakly as he approached, but it was more a wheeze than a warning. The other 2 just lay there, panting. Koru stopped a few paces away. He sat, observing. They were alone, no mother in sight, no signs of movement around them, only the claw marks of panic in the dirt, scorched paw prints, and blood, faded and dry. He didn't know why he stayed there, watching. He could have turned and walked away. Any sane creature would have. These were lions, future predators. The kind that would one day hunt baboons like him. They should have been enemies. But something deeper stirred in Koru, something ancient and inexplicable. He stood again and approached slowly. The largest cub lifted its head and gave a weak growl. Koru met its eyes. There was no threat in them, only confusion. He reached down and touched the cub's flank gently. Its breath hitched, then slowed. Trust came easier to the dying. He thought. The sun was rising higher now. Heat shimmered over the land. He had to decide. Leave them and they would perish within hours. Take them, and the entire savannah would think him mad. Even his old troop might attack him. The presence of lions would bring danger, suspicion, chaos. Still, he gathered the first cub in his arms. It didn't resist. Then the second. Then the third. He held all three awkwardly, carefully, and turned toward the hills, toward the place he had made his own. A quiet cave far from others. The journey was slow. The cubs whimpered occasionally but did not struggle. They were too weak. Koru moved through gullies and around thorn bushes, avoiding open spaces where scavengers might see him. As he neared the rocks, a hornbill called overhead, startled at the sight of him. A baboon carrying lion cubs. It was unnatural. Wrong. The savannah did not tolerate such blasphemy. But Koru didn't care. The cave was small, dry, and tucked between boulders that provided shade through most of the day. He had lived there for seasons now. Away from the noise of the troop. Away from expectations. He laid the cubs down gently on the softest patch of dry grass he had collected. They curled into each other instinctively, their small bodies trembling in the cooler air. He had no milk to give. No meat. Only bits of stolen fruit and insects he'd foraged. He sat beside them, watching. That night, the cries came again, short, pleading, fading. Koru left them and traveled through the dark, stealthy and swift despite his age. He returned near dawn with the broken body of a young hare. Caught near a stream, he tore it apart awkwardly, his old hands not used to such work anymore, and placed strips of meat beside each cub. They did not eat at first. But by midday, the eldest cub licked the blood. By sunset, the others followed. Days passed. Koru learned their sounds, their needs. He brought them lizards, eggs, fruit pulp soaked in water. He cleaned their fur when they could not. He growled at the vultures that hovered too close. He never named them, but he spoke to them softly when no one was near, words that no other baboon would understand. Once, a leopard passed near the cave. Koru waited in the shadows with a sharpened stick he had found. His old limbs trembled, but his eyes burned. The leopard moved on. One afternoon, as Koru returned from foraging, he found the smallest cub missing. Panic rose in his chest. He searched around the rocks and found it trapped in a crevice. Whimpering, he reached down and pulled it free, holding it close for a long moment. He was changing. He knew that. The savannah would never accept this. But Koru didn't care what the savannah accepted anymore. The cubs began to walk. They followed him now, sometimes stumbling, sometimes playing. Their energy returned slowly. Their eyes brightened. They no longer looked at him with confusion, but with recognition. He was their strange guardian, their silent protector, their old, broken baboon. And in the quiet hours between dusk and night, when the wind was still, Koru would sit at the mouth of his cave and watch the horizon. He knew the fire had taken much. It had ended something, but it had also begun something else, something no one would believe. And in his heart, long hardened by loss and exile, something new had taken root. Not hope, not yet, but the shape of it. The first time the troop saw them, the screams echoed through the rocks like a war cry. Baboon after baboon leapt into the trees, baring teeth and shrieking warnings. Mothers pulled the young close. Older males brandished sticks and stones. They stared in horror, frozen between fear and fury, as Koru emerged from the dust path, flanked by 3 growing lion cubs. "Su too," one shrieked. "He's brought lions to us." They had grown since the fire, stronger, surer. Their paws were clumsy but firm. Their eyes, once dazed with hunger, now glinted with sharp curiosity. And at Koru's sides, they walked not like predators, but like pupils. The troop had known Koru was strange. But this was madness. The dominant male, Ruka, young and brash, leapt forward, fur bristling. "You've cursed us," he spat. "You bring death into our home." Koru said nothing at first. He stood tall, grey fur rippling with the wind, and simply placed himself between the lions and the troop. "They are young," he said calmly. "They are mine." The uproar was instant. Baboons bellowed. Others retreated. One hurled a stick that bounced near Tamu's paw. The curious cub sniffed it, confused, then sat beside it as if it were a toy. Ruka bared his teeth. "You endanger all of us for what? Pity?" Koru's gaze did not waver. "They were alone. I chose to protect. You chose wrong." Maybe so, Koru thought, but choices made with compassion were never truly wrong. He stopped returning to the troop after that. The hills became his boundary, the cave his sanctuary. Word of the lion cub's spawn of a baboon spread across the savanna like a dry wind. Strange and dangerous. Still, in that secluded corner of the world, something extraordinary bloomed. He named them. Suma, the largest, had eyes like storm clouds and a low growl that came from her belly when danger neared. She was bold and quiet, like Koru once was. Lena, the smallest, would brush her head against Koru's arm and curl into his side during the coldest nights. She watched the world with wide, wondering eyes. And Tamu, restless, fearless, insatiably curious, chased everything that moved, from falling leaves to his own tail. With no milk, Koru learned to improvise. He crushed termites into paste, mashed berries with dried roots, mixed river water with fruit pulp and crushed shell insects. It was no lion's diet, but it kept them alive. He watched them grow lean but strong, wild but weirdly civilized. He began to teach them not as lions, but as his kind, his own impossible kin. He taught them the meaning of warning calls, a sharp bark for snakes, a rolling whoop for leopards, and the staccato grunt for humans. At first they didn't understand. But when a black mamba slithered too close one day, Koru's bark froze them in place. They watched in awe as he hurled a stone and drove it away. After that, they listened more closely. He taught him to climb, not with the grace of monkeys, but with determination. Suma, the strongest, was first to make it halfway up a marula tree. Tamu tried to leap from rock to branch and fell. Koru helped him up, patted his head, and pointed again. The next time, he made it. Even Lena, afraid of heights at first, learned to cling to the bark and scramble up when danger came. Koru knew it was unnatural for lions to climb like this, but nature had already been broken the moment he carried them from the ashes. He taught them silence, the art of watching, the stillness of hiding before striking, not for hunting, but for surviving, and in turn, they taught Koru something too, about laughter. Tamu would mimic Koru's scratch behind the ear gesture and exaggerate it until they both rolled on the ground. Lena would bring him shiny beetles as gifts. Suma, once so serious, once tackled him gently from behind, expecting a play wrestle. Koru, surprised, fell with a grunt and grinned for the first time in seasons. Not all was harmony. One evening, a band of young baboons from the troop climbed the outer ridge of Koru's territory. Shouting and jeering, they threw stones at the cave and howled insults. The cubs roared back, confused and enraged. "They'll turn on you," one baboon shouted. "They'll eat you when they're bigger." Koru stood silently, arms folded. He didn't throw stones. He didn't yell. He just stared, until the troop lost interest and scattered. But the warning lingered like smoke. He watched the cubs carefully that night. Could they become killers? Could they forget the bond? Their instincts would sharpen with time. They were lions, after all. But then Lena came to him with a wounded paw from a thorn. And Tamu nudged her gently toward Koru. Suma lay beside him protectively. No, he thought. Not yet. Seasons passed. Suma grew into a lithe, muscular lioness with sharp eyes and sharper reactions. She hunted small prey on her own now, though never near the baboons. Lena became a swift climber, able to leap from stone to branch like a creature born for it. Tamu grew long-legged and clever, mimicking Koru's motions, once even stealing a piece of fruit from a forager and offering it proudly to him. They weren't baboons, but they weren't exactly lions either. They were something else. Family. One moonless night, thunder rolled across the savannah. Koru sensed something wrong, not the sky, but the land, a stillness, a silence too deep. Then came the growl, deep, low, old, a lion, a real one, a male, massive and scarred, emerged from the shadows near the rocks. His mane was dark as night, his eyes cold. He had followed the scent of young lions. He expected to find cubs, prey, competition, perhaps even mates. Instead, he found Koru, standing in front of the cave, staff in hand. Suma snarled behind him. The lion approached slowly. He towered over Koru, but the old baboon didn't flinch. His hands tightened around the staff. "Not them," he said. His voice was low, steady. The lion growled, and from the cave behind, the three cubs, now nearly half-grown, emerged together. Shoulders pressed to each other, eyes sharp. They didn't growl, they didn't cower, they simply stood behind Koru, like students behind a teacher. For a moment, the great lion hesitated, then he turned, and vanished into the dark. The next morning, Koru sat on the rocks, looking out at the valley. Suma curled at his feet. Lena and Tamu played with a beetle nearby. He had not planned for any of this. He was an old baboon, once leader, once lost. He had expected his last days to be quiet, alone. Instead, he found himself shaping something no one would believe. A family no one could understand. An unthinkable family. And for the first time in many, many seasons, he was not just a watcher of the savannah. He was part of it again. The rains had returned. Not in torrents. Not yet. But with a kind of promise. The cracked earth softened under sudden showers. And the golden plains of the southern savannah began to blush green once more. Acacia pods ripened. Insects returned in swarms. Life stirred. So did change. The three lions, Suma, Lena, and Tamu, were no longer cubs. Their limbs were longer, their muscles rippling beneath sleek, tawny coats. When they moved, they did so with the grace of predators, not entirely baboon. Never truly lion, but their instincts had begun to press against the quiet rhythm of Koru's world. Tamu, once the most playful, now vanished for hours, returning with scratches and twigs in his fur, and a new gleam in his eye. Lena, though still gentle, had taken to watching flocks of birds with a hunter's stillness. And Suma began to pace the edges of the hills at night, her tail twitching low, her ears catching every shift in the wind. Koru saw it all, and he said nothing. They were still loyal, still followed him, still responded to his calls and crouched at his side when danger threatened. But something had shifted, subtle at first, and now undeniable. The wild inside them was waking. It was a dusky afternoon when it happened. The troop had drawn closer again, cautiously, over the months, though they never fully accepted the lions. They tolerated their presence, perhaps due to Koru's unwavering protection, perhaps due to the quiet proof that the cubs hadn't become killers. That day, a few younger baboons had wandered farther than usual from the main group. Foraging in a small clearing at the edge of the brush, Lena and Tamu lay nearby in the sun, half asleep. Suma sat upright on a high rock, watching. Koru, gathering fallen marula fruit not far off, paused suddenly. A sound, subtle, slithering. His old ears twitched. He turned, scanned the clearing. Then he saw it. A puff adder, thick-bodied, slow-moving, but deadly. Its scaled body slid through the dry grass with expert silence, heading straight for a curious young baboon poking at a hole in the earth. Koru dropped his fruit and ran, calling the alarm signal, a sharp bark that sent birds flying from trees. But he wasn't the first to reach them. Suma launched herself from the rock in a blur of motion. Tamu and Lena snapped awake and followed, bounding past startled baboons. The snake reared. The cub froze. The puff adder struck, and missed. Suma intercepted it mid-strike, her jaw clamping down on the snake's thick neck. She shook once, violently. Tamu grabbed the tail. Lena pounced, her claws pinning the writhing body to the earth. Within seconds, it was over. The troop stared, stunned. The lions, Koru's lions, had not fled, had not ignored. They had protected, but they had also killed. That night, Koru sat at the cave's mouth, silent, watching the fire-colored horizon. Suma lay beside him, still as a statue, eyes half closed. Her face bore traces of the encounter: blood, dirt, pride. Lena leaned against his side, her breath steady. Tamu paced restlessly nearby, muttering soft growls to himself, replaying the moment over and over in his young head. Koru's heart was heavy. He was proud. And he was afraid. He remembered when they couldn't lift their heads, when they fit in the crook of one arm, when their first growl was more cough than roar. And now, they were killers. Controlled, purposeful, but killers nonetheless. He touched Suma's head gently. "You protected the troop," he said. She nuzzled into his hand. "But you also answered something deeper," he added. "Something older than all I could teach you." She looked at him, and for the first time, Koru saw the lion fully. Not just the child he had raised. Not just his daughter in all but blood. But the predator she was born to become. The days that followed were filled with silence. The troop kept its distance again. Koru did not blame them. He watched the lions train together, no longer playing, but stalking, practicing pounces on fallen logs, testing the weight of their steps in the grass. They were preparing for something, even if they didn't know what. And Koru felt the ticking clock behind every sunrise. One morning, as dew still clung to the leaves, Koru called them together. He sat beneath the fig tree, in the clearing that had once been their play space. The lions gathered around him, expectant. He took a deep breath. "You know I love you," he began. Tamu blinked. Lena tilted her head. Suma narrowed her eyes. She already sensed what was coming. "You are not mine by blood. But you have been mine in every way that matters," Koru said, his voice low, rough with emotion. "I taught you to climb, to listen, to hide, but I cannot teach you to be what you are." Tamu whined softly. "You feel it, don't you?" Koru said, looking at each of them in turn. "The hunger for more than insects. The pull of the open plains. The fire in your legs when you chase. That doesn't come from me. That's the world calling to you. Your world." They didn't answer, but the silence was full. "I cannot follow where you go," Koru whispered, "but I will always be watching. Always." Lena pressed her head to his chest. Tamu sat beside him, unusually quiet, and Suma stepped back, eyes gleaming. She didn't cry, she didn't question, she simply nodded. She understood. They didn't leave right away. Days passed, then a week, but the change was real. At night, they would go farther before returning. Suma began to scent mark trees. Tamu howled at the moon for the first time. Lena watched antelope pass with a longing that tugged at something ancient. And one dawn, Koru woke to find them gone. He stepped out into the rising light, heart pounding. For a moment, he feared the worst, that they had slipped away silently, vanished into the great unknown. But then he saw them, on the ridge, all three, standing tall, silhouetted by the morning sun, watching him one last time. He raised a hand. Tamu roared, his first real roar, untrained, uncertain, but powerful. Then they turned, together, and disappeared into the tall grass. Weeks passed. The cave felt empty, even as birds returned to nest in the trees and the troop grew bold enough to forage nearby again. Koru didn't speak much, but sometimes he would sit by the fire, turning a stick in his hand, and listen. And once, just once, he heard it, far off, a low roar, then 3 echoes, and he smiled. They had not forgotten, they had simply grown. Between worlds, the dry wind had returned. Not the scorching wind of fire season, but a whispering wind, the kind that stirred memory. Koru sat on the cliff's edge as the sun rose, golden light spilling over the grasslands. He watched the world awaken. Birds called, insects buzzed. Somewhere in the valley below, a distant roar carried on the breeze. It had been many moons since Suma, Lena, and Tamu left the cave. Yet they returned, not every day, not always together, but often enough. Like migrating stars drawn back to the same sky. They brought news in their ways, scents from new places. Twigs stuck in their fur. Strange tension in their muscles. They were growing, and the world was growing too small for the space they needed. Koru knew the time had come. Truly come. One night, without a word, he gathered what little food he had and wrapped it in leaves. He carved 3 crude symbols into a piece of bark, one strong like a mountain, one soft like a curl of wind, one wild like a flame. Suma, Lena, Tamu, when they returned at dawn. He did not wait for questions. "We leave today," he said. They followed. They always did. The journey took them east, toward a part of the savannah Koru hadn't visited in seasons. Rumors had reached even his distant cave. A lion pride near the riverlands had lost its leader to a buffalo's horn. The surviving lions, young, uncertain, held the land. But barely. Territory ripe for challenge, or for inheritance. Koru knew this was no guarantee. Lions did not welcome outsiders easily. But he had raised 3 who were neither fully lion nor fully tame. If there was any pride in this land that might accept them, it was this one. So they walked. The sun hung like a coin in the sky, unforgiving. By the 3rd day, their water gourds, made from hollowed fruit, ran dry. The river they had expected to cross was only a cracked bed. Koru's steps slowed. His old bones ached, but he kept moving. Suma took the lead now. Tail held high, eyes scanning every horizon. Lena walked close to Koru, nudging him when he stumbled. Tamu darted off to scout, returning with dry roots or the occasional insect to chew. On the 5th day, they faced the hyenas. The pack came at dusk. 5 of them, skinny, scarred, but emboldened by hunger. They had picked up the lion's scent and followed for hours, waiting for weakness. They found it when Koru fell. His leg twisted in a rock fissure. He hissed in pain. Tamu howled. The hyenas charged. Suma roared, full-throated and terrible. She didn't wait. She leapt into their path. Claws out, teeth bared. Tamu followed with surprising fury, slamming into one and sending it tumbling. Lena stood over Koru, growling low and steady. The fight didn't last long. The hyenas weren't expecting resistance. One slashed Suma's side. Another tried to drag Koru. But then Tamu clamped his teeth on its neck. And it fled. Blood stained the dirt. Growls echoed into the dark. And then, silence. Koru breathed heavily. His leg throbbed, but held. The lions circled him. Not cubs. Not children. Warriors. He looked at them with a mixture of awe and sorrow. "You don't need me anymore," he whispered. But they stayed close. They still followed. By the 7th day, they reached the riverlands. The air changed, cooler, tinged with moisture. The grass grew taller, trees returned in scattered groves. And the smell of lion was everywhere. Territory. They climbed a ridge overlooking a shallow basin of sun-bleached stone and thornbush. Below, Koru saw them, 5 lions resting under a fig tree. All young, lean, eyes alert. Brothers, perhaps, or cousins. A pride without leadership, wary and tense. The pride had not seen him yet. Koru turned to the 3. "This is the edge," he said. "My feet go no farther." Lena whimpered softly. Suma lowered her head. Conflicted. Tamu paced. "They will not accept me." Koru continued. "But they may accept you. If you show them who you are, not just what." He limped back and sat beneath a tall rock. Half in shadow. The 3 lions stood together. A silence passed. Then Suma stepped forward. She didn't charge, didn't roar. She walked, deliberate, proud, with her siblings flanking her side. They didn't approach directly. They circled from downwind, stopping far enough not to be seen as a threat, close enough to be noticed. The pride stirred. 1 lion stood. Another growled. Suma lowered her head respectfully, but did not shrink. Tamu sat tall, chest forward, tail twitching with restrained energy. Lena kept her eyes on the youngest male, studying his posture. A tense minute passed. Then the largest male of the pride, pale-maned and scarred, approached Suma. He sniffed her, slow and cautious. She didn't flinch. She simply waited. A low growl rumbled from him. More question than challenge. Suma responded not with sound, but by stepping aside and nudging Lena forward. Lena bowed slightly, exposing her neck. It was an ancient sign. Trust, not weakness. The male blinked. The pride began to move. They sniffed, circled. There were no fights, no roars, just a quiet, slow ritual of weighing presence, of reading breath and movement. Tamu even flicked his paw playfully at a sub-adult lion, who blinked in confusion before mimicking the gesture. And just like that, the boundary began to blur. By nightfall, they had not been driven away. The pride did not yet call them kin. But they didn't call them strangers either. They had eaten together, small prey brought by the young lions. Shared awkwardly, they had settled under the same tree. Not close, but not far. Koru watched it all from the hilltop. He did not go down. He couldn't. Instead, he stood. The pain in his legs screamed. His heart felt heavier than ever. But his spirit, his strange, stubborn, wounded spirit, soared. He turned to leave, but a sound stopped him. Paw steps. Suma. She came alone, approaching with the quiet grace of a full-grown lioness. She didn't speak. She didn't need to. She pressed her forehead gently to Koru's. His hand rose to her cheek. Then she stepped back and roared. Not loud, but strong. A goodbye. From the rocks, Lena and Tamu appeared. They did not climb the hill, but they looked up. Their eyes met Koru's. He raised one hand. 3 shadows turned and returned to the pride. And Koru, old, broken, full, turned back toward the west. Alone again, but never truly alone. He had raised lions among baboons. He had built a family where none should exist. He had walked between worlds, and left something behind in both. Not blood, but legacy. The grass swayed in golden waves beneath the morning sun. The wind had softened since the night before, carrying with it only the gentle scent of warm soil, fresh leaves, and the faintest trace of lion. Koru stood at the edge of the ridge for a long time, watching the shapes below, 3 lions lying under a fig tree, among others of their kind. His children, though not born of his blood, now woven into the world they were meant for. Suma lay curled like a sentinel, her eyes sharp even in rest. Lena rested beside another lioness, her body relaxed, her gaze full of quiet thought. Tamu chased butterflies through the long grass as though still a cub. But his shoulders were broad now, his steps heavier. They were home, not his home, but home all the same. Koru turned slowly and began the long walk away. He walked without speaking. The land felt unchanged, yet each step took him farther from a life that had altered him completely. The ache in his joints no longer concerned him. The loneliness ahead no longer frightened him. He had walked alone before. But now, the silence he returned to was not emptiness. It was reflection. He passed through familiar valleys, the old rock den where he once nursed Lena through a fever, the dried pool where Tamu first chased frogs, the crooked tree where Suma once climbed, defying every rule of what a lion could be. He remembered every moment, and he smiled. The cave welcomed him like an old friend, quiet, dusty, exactly as he had left it. Nothing had changed, and yet everything had. Koru set his walking stick down and sat by the entrance, looking out at the savanna as it glimmered beneath the sun. He ate slowly, a few berries and a roasted grasshopper. He drank from a hollowed stone that still held morning rain. He watched a mongoose dash between bushes and disappear. The world moved on, as it always did, but in Koru's chest, something still burned. Not a fire of youth or rebellion, but something softer, steadier. A warmth he had carried since the day he found 3 half-dead cubs in the ashes. A warmth that would never leave him. Some days, the troop would pass by his ridge. They no longer shouted or threw stones. Some even paused at a distance, offering cautious glances or brief nods. No one spoke of the lions now. But everyone knew. Stories had traveled far and wide, of the old baboon who raised predators, who defied instinct and tradition. Some dismissed it as myth. Others swore by it, and a few, quietly, began to wonder what else was possible in a world that had always said no. Koru never explained. He didn't need to. He had lived it. One evening, as the horizon burned orange and shadows stretched across the rocks, Koru sat with a bundle of dry grass in his lap. Slowly, with the patience of age, he began to weave, An old habit. Forgotten for years. Not for shelter. Not for use. Just memory. He twisted the strands into shapes. 3 lines. Woven tight together. He tied them with a strand of his own fur. And set them by the entrance. A symbol, perhaps. Or just a reminder. That once, a baboon loved 3 lions. And they loved him in return. Seasons passed. The rains came and went. He saw the lions only from afar now, on rare days when the sky was clear and the wind carried their scent. Once, he saw Suma standing on a far-off rock, her form a silhouette against a rising storm. She turned her head, just slightly, as if searching for something in the wind. He raised his hand from the cliffside. She didn't see, but he waved anyway. He no longer feared what would happen to them. He had taught them not just to hunt or hide, but to listen, to think, to choose. He had planted something inside them stronger than survival. Compassion, connection, and though the savannah was fierce, and fate often cruel, Koru believed, truly believed, that they would carry that fire with them. That it would change something, not just in themselves, but in the world around them. Because love, real love, didn't vanish. It moved, it lingered, it passed on, like seed in wind. One twilight, as the stars blinked into life above him, Koru spoke aloud. Not to anyone. Not even to the wind. Just to say the words. Everything they become, he whispered, is part of me now. He looked up at the stars. You go on ahead, he said, but don't forget where you came from. He chuckled softly, closing his eyes for a moment. I know I won't. Somewhere, far across the grasslands, a young lioness taught her cubs how to listen for snakes. A golden-maned male showed his pride how to climb low branches to escape a flood. And a playful lion, the lightest-footed of the 3, sat by a nervous antelope calf and let it pass, unchased, just because something in him remembered gentleness. They had not forgotten, they never would. And in his quiet cave, under a sky bursting with stars, Koru watched, waited, and believed. Because what is planted in love is never truly lost. Because even when paths divide, even when bloodlines fade, even when nothing remains but dust and story, the fire still burns.
Thank you for watching the video. If you enjoyed it, please comment 1. And if you didn't, just hit like. See you in the next videos.